It was late afternoon, and I was cleaning my bedroom when I heard the door creak behind me. I turned around and there was Logan standing in the doorway, staring at the thing in my hands. My heart stopped. How could I explain this? The object was far from innocent, a large, brightly colored toy, one that no polite conversation could sidestep. I had pulled it out of the drawer to dust the back of the cabinet, not thinking much of it. I had locked the door. Or so I thought. Logan was my 23-year-old stepson. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. He worked at a local brewery and usually stayed out late with friends after his shifts. But there he was, tall and lean, his dark hair falling into his amused blue eyes. "What's that?" he asked, his voice caught somewhere between curiosity and teasing. My face went red hot. I dropped the item like it had burned me and grabbed the first thing I could find, a throw pillow from the bed, to cover it. "It's none of your business," I stammered, feeling my throat tighten. But his expression didn't change. If anything, he leaned against the door frame, his curiosity growing. "You know, you don't have to act so embarrassed," he said with a small smirk. It's not like I haven't seen something like that before. I wanted to crawl into a hole. The audacity of this kid. Well, man, really, to stand there so casually, completely unfazed, while my world spun out of control. I forced a laugh, desperate to diffuse the tension. "Logan, seriously, go mind your own business. You shouldn't even be in here." But he didn't move. For a moment, there was silence between us, heavy and almost unbearable. He wasn't looking at the pillow in my hands anymore.
He was looking at me.
His gaze was different. Not the usual laid-back or playful glances I was used to. This one lingered too long, too intently. It was as if he had peeled back a layer of the person he thought I was and found someone else entirely. I felt something strange, a flicker of warmth deep in my chest, followed by a sharp pang of guilt. This was wrong. Whatever this was, it was absolutely wrong. I was his stepmother, for God's sake. I was married to his father. I shook my head and broke the silence. "Please, Logan, just go." He finally shrugged, lifting his hands in mock surrender. All right, he said, his tone light again. But before he left, he gave me one last look, a look that sent my already unsettled thoughts into overdrive. As the door closed behind him, I sat down on the edge of the bed, the pillow still clutched against my chest. My heart was racing. I couldn't even bring myself to put the item back into the drawer. It felt like something invisible had shifted in the air between us. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I knew I'd never see Logan the same way again. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't shake the moment from my mind. I tried. I cooked dinner, folded laundry, and even sat next to Daniel on the couch while he flipped through old westerns on the TV. But Logan's face, his amused smirk, and the unsettling glint in his eyes haunted me. Daniel barely noticed my distraction. That was nothing new. He'd been wrapped up in his hobbies, gardening, woodworking, crossword puzzles, for years now, ever since his retirement. I didn't resent him for it. That would have been too easy. But sometimes, I felt like more of a living caretaker than a wife. At one point, I glanced down the hall and caught Logan's shadow as he moved around in his room. I could hear the faint hum of music coming through his door, a low bass line that didn't match the quiet stillness of the rest of the house. My heart jumped, for no reason I could justify. I turned my attention back to my husband. Daniel was snoring softly, his chin tilted down toward his chest. He'd fallen asleep in his recliner again, the TV still droning on. I thought about waking him, but what would be the point? Instead, I stood and wandered into the kitchen, grateful for a moment of solitude. But I wasn't alone for long. Logan walked in, his bare feet quiet against the hardwood floor. He wore a faded t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair tousled like he'd just run his hands through it. "Hey," he said casually, opening the fridge and grabbing a bottle of water. "You're up late. I could say the same about you," I replied, keeping my tone light. He smiled, leaning against the counter. "Just unwinding, you know. It's not easy being under this roof sometimes." The comment made me pause. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, but there was a hint of something serious in his expression. "It's nothing. Just living here again, I guess." I feel like I don't fit anymore. I softened at that. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of maternal concern. It's just temporary, Logan. You'll figure things out. You're smart and capable. You'll land on your feet. Thanks, Marissa, he said, his voice quieter now. I appreciate that. For a moment, we stood in silence. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, the space between us shrinking even though neither of us moved. His eyes lingered on mine, and I felt that same flicker of warmth in my chest again. I cleared my throat and busied myself wiping the counter, desperate to break whatever spell was threatening to take hold. But Logan wasn't finished. About earlier, he started, his tone turning playful again. You don't have to be embarrassed, you know. I mean, we're all human, right? My hand froze mid-wipe, and I turned to him, trying to keep my composure. Logan, let's not talk about that, all right? It was an accident, and it's not worth bringing up again. Okay, he said, raising his hands in surrender. But there was a teasing edge in his smile that made my stomach flip. He walked past me then, close enough that I caught a faint whiff of his cologne. I didn't turn around, but I could feel his presence behind me for a moment before he finally... We're meant to be crossed. But Logan had a way of bending those lines, even when he wasn't trying to. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure I wanted him to stop. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I prepared breakfast like I always did, eggs, toast, and coffee for Daniel, a smoothie for myself. Logan was the last to come into the kitchen, as usual, his hair still damp from a shower. He greeted Daniel with a casual morning, and me with a warm smile that made my pulse quicken. The three of us sat at the table, the clinking of silverware and occasional snippets of conversation filling the air. But underneath it all, I could feel the tension. Every time Logan's hand brushed mine as we passed the salt or refilled coffee, it felt deliberate. I caught him watching me more than once, his gaze steady and unreadable. Daniel, of course, noticed none of this. After breakfast, Logan offered to help me clean up. Normally, he would have disappeared into his room or gone out with friends, so his offer caught me off guard. You don't have to, I said, stacking plates in the sink. I want to, he replied, already grabbing a dish rag. We worked in silence for a while, but the air between us felt charged. At one point, I reached for a glass at the same time he did, and our hands collided. Neither of us pulled away immediately. You're different, he said quietly, his voice just above a whisper. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? He hesitated, his eyes searching mine. I don't know. You don't act like other women your age. I laughed nervously, stepping back to create some distance. Well, that's flattering, I suppose. It's not just that, he continued, his tone serious now. You're real. You actually listen. You see people. The sincerity in his voice took me off guard. I didn't know what to say, so I turned back to the dishes. But as I scrubbed, I felt his presence close behind me. My heart was racing again, and I hated how much I wanted him to stay there. Before I could gather my thoughts, Daniel's voice called from the living room. Marissa, where's my crossword book? The moment shattered. Logan stepped back, giving me a small, knowing smile. I'll let you get back to him, he said, his voice light again. As he walked away, I felt a mix of relief and longing. I knew I was playing with fire, but some part of me couldn't help but reach for the heat. That afternoon, I busied myself with errands, anything to keep my mind occupied. But when I returned home, I found Logan sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the yard. He looked lost in thought, a far cry from the confident young man I was used to seeing. Hey, I said softly as I approached. He looked up, his face breaking into a small smile. Hey. Everything all right? He hesitated before answering. Yeah, just thinking about life, I guess. Where I'm headed. Where I should be headed. I sat down beside him, keeping a safe distance, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence. You're young, Logan. You don't have to have it all figured out yet. Maybe, he said, his gaze still fixed on the yard. Then after a pause, he added, You ever feel like you're meant for something different? Like you're trapped in the wrong story? His words hit closer to home than I cared to admit. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay. But the truth was, I didn't believe that myself. Instead, I placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed gently. "You're not trapped," I said, hoping he wouldn't notice the tremor in my voice. For a moment, he covered my hand with his. The gesture felt impossibly intimate. I pulled away quickly, but the damage was done. Another line crossed, another boundary blurred. And I wasn't sure I had the strength to stop it anymore. That evening, the sky turned dark with an oncoming storm. The air hung heavy, as though the world itself was waiting for something to happen. Daniel had gone to bed early, as he often did, complaining about an aching shoulder. I had settled into the living room, a book in hand, but I couldn't focus. The storm outside mirrored the one building within me, something restless, unpredictable, and dangerous. Logan was in the kitchen. The sound of the fridge opening and closing carried through the quiet house. I could hear the faint clink of glass as he poured himself a drink. Moments later, he appeared in the doorway of the living room, holding 2 glasses. "Whis?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I blinked, caught off guard. "I don't usually drink this late." "Well, maybe tonight's an exception." He grinned, handing me a glass without waiting for an answer. I hesitated, but took it. The cool glass pressed against my palm. Logan sank into the armchair across from me, stretching his legs out casually. The lamp beside me cast a warm glow across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw and the faint shadow of stubble on his chin. "What are you reading?" he asked, nodding toward the book in my lap. "Just something light," I replied, holding it up briefly. "Nothing exciting." He smirked. "I find that hard to believe." I laughed softly, taking a sip of the whiskey. It burned, but it was a welcome distraction from the tension that had been building all day. For a while, we sat in comfortable silence. The storm outside grew louder. Then he spoke again, his voice low. "Can I ask you something?" I glanced at him wearily. "Depends on what it is." He swirled the liquid in his glass, his eyes fixed on it as though he were gathering his thoughts. "Do you ever feel stuck?" His question startled me. It was eerily similar to the one he'd asked earlier on the porch, but now there was a different weight to it. "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended. He looked up then, his eyes meeting mine. "You don't seem like someone who should be stuck. You're too alive for that." I felt my cheeks flush. I looked away, setting my glass down on the coffee table. "Logan, you shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "It's true." His words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. I stood abruptly, needing to put space between us. "I think it's time we called it a night," I said, avoiding his gaze. But before I could leave the room, the power went out. The sudden darkness was disorienting, and I froze mid-step. "Oh," I muttered, my voice shaky. "It's just the storm," Logan said, his tone calm. I heard him stand, the soft shuffle of his feet on the carpet. "Hold on, I'll find a flashlight." I heard him move closer, the faint rustle of fabric as he passed me. Then his hand brushed against mine in the dark. I sucked in a sharp breath. "Sorry," he murmured, his voice low, roughened slightly by something I couldn't name, regret, hesitation, or maybe something more dangerous. But even as the word left his lips, he didn't pull away. His hand remained where it was, warm and unmoving against mine, the heat of his skin seeping into my trembling fingers. It wasn't just a touch, it was a quiet confession, a silent plea, a moment suspended in time. The air between us seemed to shift, heavy with unspoken words and a tension I could almost taste. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart was hammering so hard against my ribs that I was sure he could hear it, even over the distant rumble of thunder rolling through the sky, like a warning. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, all I could do was listen, to the rain beginning to tap against the windows, to the stillness of the room, to the steady rhythm of his breathing just inches away. "Marissa," he whispered, so softly my name barely existed in the space between us. But it reached me. It wrapped around me, intimate and terrifying. I turned toward the sound of his voice, even though I couldn't see him in the dark. But I could feel him, closer now, somehow, as if my name had given him permission to step over some invisible line neither of us wanted to acknowledge. And then, gently, his hand moved, sliding up from mine to my wrist, his fingers curling around it with careful tenderness, as if afraid I might break. As if he didn't want to let go. But what if I asked him to? This is a bad idea. I breathed, the words barely holding together, shaky and fragile. I know, he said, and there was pain in his voice. A battle he was losing. But still, he didn't let go. Just then, lightning cracked across the sky, spilling light into the room for a heartbeat. And in that fleeting moment, I saw him. His face was illuminated, his eyes wide, searching mine, his features stripped of all pretense. Earnest, vulnerable, and impossibly close. Too close, and yet not close enough. And then, without warning, he kissed me. It wasn't rushed or forceful, nothing like the storms we'd been trying to outrun. It was soft at first, hesitant, like he was holding his breath, waiting for the inevitable moment I would pull away, reject him, remind him of everything that made this impossible. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, something inside me unraveled. Some wall I had kept fortified for far too long gave way, and before I knew it, I was leaning into him, my body moving on instinct, as though it had known long before my mind ever dared to admit it. My fingers clutched at the fabric of his shirt, gripping it like it was the only thing keeping me anchored, like if I let go, the ground beneath us might disappear. His hand slid up the curve of my jaw, steady and warm, and the world around us faded until it was just us, in the hush of the darkened room, lost in a moment we'd tried to pretend we didn't want. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the lights came flickering back to life with a quiet hum. We broke apart, startled, breathless. For a second, we just stared at each other. His lips were parted, his chest rising and falling rapidly like mine, the weight of what had just happened hanging between us like smoke. There was no more pretending now. No more hiding behind tension or silence or circumstance. Reality slammed into me like a wave crashing against the shore. I stumbled back a step, heart racing, my hands trembling as they dropped from his chest. "This can't happen," I said, barely recognizing my own voice. It came out hoarse, laced with fear and something dangerously close to regret. I shook my head slowly, trying to anchor myself in anything other than what I had just felt. Logan didn't try to argue. He didn't try to stop me or reach for me again. He just stood there, rooted in place, his expression unreadable, his eyes shadowed with something I couldn't quite name. "I know," he said at last, his voice quiet but steady. But it didn't matter. The words felt hollow now. The damage was already done. In the days that followed, I did everything I could to forget the way his lips had felt against mine, the way his arms had fit around me like they belonged there. I buried myself in distractions, organizing shelves that didn't need organizing, scrubbing floors that were already clean, volunteering for errands no one asked me to run. Anything to keep my mind from wandering back to that moment. But it was no use. Because even though I avoided Logan every chance I got, even though I kept my distance and made sure we were never alone in the same room, the memory lingered. In every stolen glance we exchanged, in every unfinished sentence, in every silence that said too much, something had changed. And we both knew it. But no matter how many distractions I buried myself in, no matter how many times I told myself to forget, I couldn't. I couldn't shake the memory of the way his lips had moved against mine, tentative at first, then certain. I couldn't forget how his hand had lingered on my wrist, gentle but unyielding, like he didn't want to let go, like part of him hoped I wouldn't ask him to. The memory lived just beneath the surface, ready to break through at the smallest trigger, a glance, a word, a silence that stretched too long. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon and the house was bathed in the soft amber of dusk, I was standing in the guest room folding a basket of freshly laundered clothes. The scent of detergent and warm cotton clung to the air, and I clung to it, needing the normalcy, the routine. Something safe. Then I heard the soft creak of the door. I looked up, startled, and there he was, Logan. standing in the doorway like he belonged there. Like this wasn't dangerous. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm, but edged with resolve. I didn't even look at him. I focused on folding a towel that didn't need folding, willing my hands to stay steady. "There's nothing to talk about," I replied, my voice flat, rehearsed. "Yes, there is," he said. And this time, he stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind him with a quiet click. The sound echoed in my chest like a warning. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, then placed the laundry down with exaggerated care. My hands lingered on the fabric for a moment before I finally looked up to meet his eyes. "Logan, whatever this is between us, it has to stop," I said. My voice trembled despite my best efforts. "It's wrong. You know it is." "Is it?" he shot back, taking a step closer, his tone low and unwavering. "Because it doesn't feel wrong to me. It feels like the first real thing I've felt in a long time." His words sent a shiver straight through me. A dangerous, aching truth lurked behind them, and I hated how deeply it resonated. Still, I tried to hold my ground, tried to summon logic in the face of emotion. "You don't understand," I whispered, shaking my head, eyes burning. "If Daniel ever found out." "He won't," Logan said quickly, almost dismissively. "And even if he did, do you really think he'd care?" The bitterness in his voice was sharp, unfiltered. He laughed without humor, rubbing the back of his neck like he couldn't believe we were still pretending. "He barely even sees you anymore," he said. "You're just there, a shadow in your own home." The words hit hard, not because they were cruel, but because they were too close to the truth. I swallowed hard, turning away, trying to mask the pain in my expression. But the silence gave me away. Logan stepped forward again, slower this time, more careful. "Why are you fighting this so hard?" he asked, softer now. "Because of him? Because of what people might say?" He paused, then added, "Or because of what it means for you? Because you're afraid of what you might actually feel." I opened my mouth, ready to refute him, to throw up some well-practiced defense, but the words never came. Instead, my breath caught in my throat, and I felt the sting of tears threatening to fall. I blinked rapidly, willing them back, refusing to let him see just how much his words had shaken me. But Logan saw anyway.
And he didn't look away.
Thank you for staying with us. If you find it interesting and useful, please subscribe, like, and share so you don't miss the next video. Thanks.